been here for a couple decades, and during that time, part of what I've done is manage a program where we go around and look at ospreys. So I've been around them for quite a while, and what you're seeing straight off the bat in this first photograph was the first time I went to band osprey. I had a little tiny digital camera when they first came out, and I walked up the ladder, got to the top. It sat up like that. It couldn't have been more than a foot or two from my face. I stood up straight, and we didn't know what to do for a few seconds. So I just took a picture and got back down and was thinking, oh my gosh, this is just one bird. Eventually I figured out there's better times to go than others as far as their age. So that is, and you see those amazing eyes that we'll be talking about as well. So that was taken by person. We will get right into it here. So we'll talk about the osprey itself initially here. It's the only bird of prey that feeds just on fish, like 99.99%. If there's no fish around or something happens, it will get a snake or something like that. But otherwise, it just eats fish. And you'll see throughout this program how utterly amazing it is at that. It can catch, average time to catch a fish is about 12 minutes. So are there any people that fish here? There probably is. Do you catch a fish every 12 minutes? All right, stop, you're fibbing. You don't. That's almost impossible. That's how fishermen get tails, right? Yeah, I catch them every 12 minutes. Well, they do, and it's just astounding. You can watching our camera every few minutes, it's just bringing in a fish. And it's not easy to do. Try holding a fish. So it's pretty astounding. When they do get a fish, they carry it head first. If they grab it by tail, they flip it around. They align it with the body. It flies better that way. It's more aerodynamic. And they normally hold it with two talons on one side and two talons on the other. We'll talk about that in a minute. And they use these thermals and updrafts. I'm not sure if you've heard about them, but in the air, in the environment, there's warm air and cold air moving all over. Just picture cold air being blue and warm air being orange. If you could see it, and who knows, there's probably an organism that can see that, but if you could see it, you would just see a kaleidoscope of different airs moving, updrafts, downdrafts. Well, the ospreys can feel it, and they use it because they have, these soaring birds. If you can just float around with using less energy, you're going to do that. So they use those all the time, and you can, if you've birded at all and watched hawks, it's what they do. I mean, they just, and some birds are so good at it, they can fly for hours and hours without even beating their wings. They prey on over 80 species of fish, and this gives them the ability to be all over the place. And we'll talk about their migration and where they're all over the world later, but they have a really varied diet. If they only had a couple fish they could feed on, they would be really limited their range. But there's 80 plus, and that includes freshwater fish. They can go out in the ocean. I think ours at the Meadows Preserve, they also go out in the ocean because one day they came in back in the nest to feed the chicks with a small shark. I haven't fished at the Meadows. We can't fish there, but I've never seen anybody pull a shark out of our meadows. So I can't imagine that came from there. It's a saltwater fish. So it's interesting that they have that ability to just any fish, salt, fresh. And they can see right through the water glare. Everybody has, at this point, probably known, if you put on a pair of polarized sunglasses and you go out, just in your car even, all of a sudden the glare off of the hood in front of you goes away. And if you're out on the water, all the glare on the water goes away. And once that glare goes away, you see through it. And if the water's clean, you can see a couple feet down. Osprey can do that. They can see right through it. I would imagine if you studied them, you could somehow prove that they have polarized eyes. Not to mention, if you've ever tried to, as a kid, poke a stick in the water and you look down and the stick's going at a wacky angle, they have to figure that out too, which obviously they do. They have a preying gland, and it creates pretty oily feathers, not as much as a duck. A duck, for example, they're so wet all the time, they have to have heavily oiled feathers, or they would just get waterlogged and sink. There are birds like cormorants that don't have much of that. You'll see them, but their wings not like that, drying off because they're waterlogged. Osprey have this preying gland, and they put a bunch of oil on their feathers. So when they go down, and sometimes they go completely under, they have to be able to take off from the water, and that's much harder than you think. The shape of their wings helps them with that. You need that explosive power to get back out of the water after you've gotten a fish. Now, if you look at this foot on the left here, this is just amazing. Only owls have this type of foot. No other raptors do, aside from Osprey. Now, what they can do, I mean, that's just formidable. You see that really hooked talon? Now, other raptors have a hooked talon, but these are super curved. So when it gets inside a fish and through the scales, it holds like nothing else. Down on the bottom left, you see the hooked talon and the barbed pads. If you were to run your hand over the feet of these birds, it feels like really rough sandpaper. So it's super grippy at the same time. And they have this awesome reversible toe. None of the other raptors have this thing, of course. They can flip that toe all over the place. They can take it and they can go all the way over to this toe. They can bring it all the way over to here. And they create kind of a pincher instead of just a wide open claw. And it helps with holding fish. You can see this one coming in on the platform. Their feet are very formidable and super, super strong for a raptor its size. If you were to see them flying, you know, it's a big bird, 5-foot wingspan on average, which is pretty darn big. And telling them apart can be very frustrating, but the female, as in all raptors, is larger, sometimes substantially larger than the male. And you'll see kind of a little feathered necklace under there. But I mean, you know, your binoculars, that can be tough. But after a while, you can start picking them out. And it kind of has a M shape, you know, up, down to its wings. One way to help identify it. The other way you can identify it, now this isn't scientific, but this is something we learned watching them build the nest. The female will come and work on the nest, and boy, she's fastidious. Well, that branch fits there, fits it right in, all of a sudden it's starting to look like something. The male comes in with sticks and it's the wrong size, it's a big long thing, he drops it nowhere, it doesn't work, and the female just get out of here, and then she pokes it in. But that's one way we notice the difference as well. It's funny to watch them at that time. Now their eyes are just absolutely incredible. This, I believe, was that same day. I had an old camera with a macro lens, and I was about an inch from the eye of this bird. Isn't that just beautiful? If you look over here where my mouse is, there's a couple different eyelids here that it uses. You know, you don't really think of birds and eyelids very often, but they can use them, especially Osprey, and I'll show you why in just a second. So here is on the left something called a nictitating membrane. This thing flies over across the eye and creates like a pair of safety goggles for the bird. It uses this when it's eating. If you watch, and you can watch, well, I watched it all season when they were eating fish. When it bends its head down to the fish, there's bones and stuff sticking out. This eyelid comes over and protects its eye. It can see underwater with this eye if it happens to be under there. When it's hunting and it goes into the water, this lens comes across. I believe it's Shark Week. If you watch that, you see on the sharks, they have the same kind of, they can't see through theirs like the Osprey can, but it's a really neat protective layer that comes across. And just looking at the eye on the right, you can see just the clarity. It's super amazing. And these gradually turn this color. And when they're an adult, they'll be bright yellow. Awesome, awesome eyes. Osprey migration. Most birds migrate. It's just something to do. Insects migrate. Lots of stuff migrates to better habitats, whether it's for breeding and food, stuff like that. In New Jersey, Osprey arrive around, it depends, sometimes late February, but normally early March. And then they leave about October. There's a little room on each side of that. I've been noticing some pretty interesting things recently, as you know, about climate change. I'm sure you do. It doesn't matter if you believe in it or not, it's happening. It makes a difference. But so what I've noticed about Osprey is that for the past 2 years, I've seen an Osprey in January, which is just blew me away, because you're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be migrating. What if all the water freezes? You know, there's loads of issues. But there's always these species right on the edge, testing the water. That's how I think some species are going to do better than others, because they branch out. If it makes it, maybe it'll get better hunting earlier than other ones. And anyway, just an interesting migration thing I've noticed with Osprey. So they get here during those times, they overwinter way down south, some way, I mean, that's really far down there. That's a long trip. Summer breeding is way up top, but also down the coast. If you could zoom into that, you would see that little bit of orange over there. Yeah, so they got a pretty big range here. They do mate for life, and they return to the same nesting grounds every year, which is kind of neat. One day I wish to be able to create a band that IDs the bird from a distance, and I can say, oh, look, they're back. You know, it's the exact same one. They've done that in the past. They've proven it now. They come back to the same nesting grounds every year. Banning osprey for so long, there's birds that I know now. They know me. They just kind of, okay, here he is. He's all right. And then they let me go do my stuff. Not a big deal. Here's a shot on a project that Audubon did. So this is pretty remarkable. They named this osprey Penelope, and they put a tracker, a very accurate tracker on this bird, on this osprey. And its journey was in 13 days, 2,700 miles. Now, keep in mind, this is not an old bird. This is a 3-month-old female. Now, you know, it just learned flying. And look what it did from Martha's Vineyard to coastal Maryland, North Carolina, and it flew alone, 2,700 miles. It stopped in the Bahamas for a few days, had a little snack there or a drink down there, and just went over. That's an incredible, absolutely incredible journey. Just thinking, you know, just learning how to fly. It's just, I find that just fascinating that it could do something like that. Much of it's hardwired, sure, but they don't, you know, they don't get done in October and the parents say, hey, come with us, and they fly down with the parents. We'll show you where to go. It doesn't happen that way. They go by themselves. Just makes it all that more remarkable that they could do something like that. I'm hoping, since we have our Osprey platform, it's been about 6 years at the Meadows, and we just got a cool camera on it we'll talk about. I would love to be able to someday put a tracker on one of our birds. That would be just astounding to be able to follow it and see where it goes. That's one of our hopes, that we can do that someday. Here's their distribution of the most widely distributed raptor, all over the place. As you can see, the blue is where they're at. If you could zoom into Australia to the coast, there's a very fine blue line. I can't zoom in enough to see that, but it's right along the coast here. They're also there. So that's pretty darn widespread for a raptor. Here's a little timeline of them in New Jersey. So in the 1800s, there was loads of them, very abundant. 1890, huge declines, habitat loss. You know, the story we hear a lot about, eradication of nest sites. People were, back then they shot them, you know, they thought raptors were either affecting their crops or attacking other things, eating the eggs. 1930s and 40s, they continued to decline. And then the big hammer came down of DDT, which is an amazing insecticide in its own right, but has some just awful consequences for wildlife and raptors in particular. And, you know, that had a good span of time that they were using that stuff. By 1975, and that's not very long, there was only 53 pairs left in New Jersey. They were not doing well. And if it had kept going on, I mean, they would just be gone. And this didn't just affect osprey. Eagles, peregrines, all of them. It just decimated the populations. What DDT did was, if it gets in your system, you can't get rid of it. It sits inside you. It's not like you can digest it out and then it goes away and you can eat something. It doesn't work that way. It builds up. It's called bioaccumulation. And you can see, you know, these little guys at the bottom of this food chain, there's millions of these. They're so small. They get eaten by something just a little bit bigger, but these are full of it. And then by the time these bigger ones eat loads of the smaller ones that are full of it, it just keeps accumulating and gets more and more. By the time the osprey are eating the fish are just saturated with DDT. And then it goes into them and it just, wreaks havoc. And they started to have all these fertility issues. Egg shells were too thin. They would lay these eggs after, you know, and it takes a lot to do all this for a bird just to get to that point. It lays the eggs, it sits on the eggs, and they all crack. So much for that. No osprey getting out of that. And that continued to happen. It happened to eagles. It was just awful. And, you know, it was just a terrible thing was happening. Fortunately, there's conservationists around, right? People that care, scientists, and they studied it, and they got together and they banned it. They banned it in New Jersey. And look at the timeline here. In '68, they banned it, right? And you know, the '70s were a heyday of all these awesome regulations and conservation acts that we're used to talking about now. Well, they started the New Jersey Endangered Species List in 1974. Osprey, I believe, was the first bird ever put on it. And about a decade later, it was the first species taken off the endangered species list. So look how resilient nature is if you just give it a chance. I mean, they were already removed. And it takes a lot to put something on and take it off. So it had been doing well. Now you fast forward to 2020, and now we have record numbers, even higher than we had historically even looked at. So here's a little chart that you can go through. These are number nesting pairs, all the way up to 700. And here's the years, 60 and 72. As you go along, 200 in 1987, jump all the way up to 2012, 500 pairs. And what's even more important is the young. You can have loads of pairs, but if the productivity is terrible, it's still not going to matter. But look at the young. By 2019, we're nearing 1,000 successful young, which is just fantastic. I love talking about it because it's the doom and gloom that the world is in. There is true conservation stories still happening, and it's something, you know, lots of people had their hand in, and it's the kind of stuff that we love to do. That was just amazing. I'm going to move out, and Lily's going to talk a little about monitoring and banding.
All right, hello everyone. So part of our responsibilities for the Osprey platforms are doing an annual check to see the conditions that they're in. So we are responsible for about 25 to 30 platforms that span across 7 different marsh and estuaries in southern New Jersey. Basically what we do is we load up our boat with any materials that we might need to make repairs to the platforms or to the poles themselves. And we go out to each platform individually and we check at the condition. Some common things that we look for are the state of the perch poles, which are these here. Sometimes we have to adjust them. Sometimes we have to completely replace them. We also look to see if the predator guards are still intact. If they're not, we will repair them as needed. And then we also check to see the actual condition of the nesting platform itself. For example, this one here had completely blown off and fell in the water, so we had to build a new one and install it from the boat. And lastly, the other thing that we look for is actually the status of the pole itself. If it's leaning, we will adjust it. And if it's not, of course, we'll just let it be. So along with doing the monitoring of the conditions for the platforms, we also go out every late June, early July to do the Osprey banding. This is actually something that we allow people to come along for, so friends, volunteers, anyone who might be interested. So if this is something that you wanted to tag along with us, definitely stay in touch with us. Again, we do this at the end of every June and late June, early July. And the reason we do it this time of year is because the ospreys are about 4 to 5 weeks old. That is the best time to band them because they are not able to fly yet, but they are full grown enough to where the band properly fits them. If you band them too soon, the band can actually kind of slide down over their talon like this, which will cause them problems in the future. And then of course, if you band them too late and they are able to fly, you have the risk of them either falling out of the nest and not being able to get back up, or just flying away and we won't be able to band them. So one of the reasons why we do banding is to focus on the productivity of the nest. We record how many ospreys have fledged from that nest, and then we give that information to the state. And what happens when we go up there is, as you can see in this photo, the ospreys actually will lie down and they oftentimes will play dead. It's pretty quick and it's definitely a painless process. I'd say we're up there for maybe 2 to 3 minutes at the most per nest. The parents will typically just fly overhead, keep an eye on us, make sure, you know, we're not doing anything wrong. Every once in a while, they will swoop down towards us, but it's usually pretty calm. And this is an example of what the bands look like. As you can see, there is a specific set of numbers on there. Those are unique to each osprey. Can't really tell, but there's also a phone number on there, and that's the phone number you call to report if you are able to see this band, or if you happen to come across one of these ospreys, you call, record it, and let the state know. So a really awesome project that we got to work on this year was installing an Osprey camera. And this here is Nigel. He is our IT guy. He was basically the brains behind the technical aspects of installing the camera. We had a lot of things that we had to consider because we had to be able to power the Osprey camera from the platform itself all the way to the power source, which was about 12 to 1400 feet away from the platform. And keep in mind, we also had to be able to run power through the marsh, which you'll see in the next couple of photos. So he came up with the idea of using this material called Power over Ethernet cable. This is an outdoor version of it, so it is waterproof. And we had to get 4 different sections of this cable. We used these little boxes here. They're called repeaters. We use them to connect the cables throughout the marsh. And then to protect the repeaters, we made these waterproof PVC cases. And they're all throughout our marsh. We tried to disguise them. That way, people wouldn't see them and maybe mess with them. And as for installing the actual camera here, we made a little extension off of the side of the perch pole. We extended it this way just so you could get a little bit better view of the nest. On top of the extension there, we added some pigeon spikes just so the ospreys wouldn't sit up there, add extra weight, potentially knock it down. And here you can see the type of area that we were running this cable through. That is Nigel there running the cables. This is all completely grown in now. This was right after they mowed it, so it was looking nice then, but going through now, it's definitely a bit of a challenge. And this is just a closer look here so you can see the pigeon spikes and how the cable went through the back of the camera all the way down the post, 1200 feet over to the power source, which is at our work shed. And this is actually the moment that Nigel realized that it was in fact going to work. When we went into this, we were not 100% sure if this system would work because we were really pushing the power of the cables to the absolute limit. Nigel was, we were all completely thrilled, but especially Nigel because he spent so much time looking into this. Wasn't sure if it was going to work, and this was the image I captured right when he realized, oh my gosh, we're live. It's going to be perfect. This is awesome. So at this point, the only thing we had to do was set up Wi-Fi. That way we could stream it live to Facebook, our website, YouTube, and all different platforms of social media. So we weren't able to do that until the next morning, the day after we got it installed. So I went over and I met the Xfinity rep. There was supposed to be some pretty bad weather that day, but he came and we got it set up. I called Nigel, he got everything live. It was really exciting for us. And since it was going to be really bad weather, I decided I was going to work from home. And on my way home, I gave Damon a call. Hey, everything is ready to go. The camera's live. We got everything working. He says, great. And about 10, 15 minutes later, I get a phone call back and he says, why is the horizon vertical? I'm like, what are you talking about? I was just there. Everything's perfect. And he said, no, look on YouTube. The horizon is like this. Turns out a 75 mile per hour gust of wind actually pushed the platform over. I'm not even kidding, about 10 minutes after we got everything set up. So our first thought is we are incredibly nervous about it being in this condition because the osprey might find somewhere else to nest. So we decided to go out during these tornado warnings to fix the platform. This here is Damon with the rope that we attached to the very top of the platform. And what we did was he stood on this side and pulled, and then I stood over here with a very long 2x4 and I kind of propped it right up here and I would push. And we did this until it was straight as we could get it. And just for extra security, we decided to install a post kind of right over here, and we secured the rope to it just to, you know, peace of mind that it would weather out the rest of the day. So that was definitely a little scary, but we were able to fix it, and the Osprey came back within about 10 minutes after we left the platform. So we were very relieved because, as you can see, they had already started putting in nesting material for the year. So luckily for us, we had a very successful season. Ospreys will typically lay between 2 and 3 eggs. We had 3 in our nest, and the parents will take turns incubating. So it was pretty fun to see, you know, the mom would be on the eggs, and then the dad would swoop in, and the mom would go out for a little fly. It was really fun to see how they interacted. They were laid, I believe it was the end of April is when we saw the first egg lay. And it typically takes ospreys about 30 days to hatch. And there is this process that occurs during hatching called pecking order. So the eggs will actually hatch in the order that they were laid. This will give the chicks that hatch first an advantage because they learn, you know, feeding behaviors, they learn how to beg better, and the parents will feed the most aggressive beggars first. So what happens is the first 2 that are born, which this also happened in our nest, they become the most aggressive beggars. So the parents always feed them first, and the 3rd hatched, which we called the runt of our nest, becomes more submissive when it comes to feeding time. It starts to understand, okay, my siblings get fed first, and then I'm last. This definitely caused a little bit of stress for some of our viewers because people were wondering, hey, why is this little one not getting fed? As you can see here, it was pretty significantly smaller than the other 2. Sometimes this rivalry or pecking order can lead to the older siblings kind of beating up on the younger one. This did happen a few times. We were a little worried, but he pulled through. Absolutely completely healthy now, and we're super proud of the runt, and all of our viewers are very happy that he's doing well and healthy. And they have all learned to fly at this point. They typically learn to fly about 2 months old after hatching, and then they will remain at the nest with their parents for probably another 2 months, give or take, after they have learned to fly. And we'll give it back to Damon.
Thank you, Lily. I just wanted to speak a moment since we're on platforms, that if you wonder if individual actions can, you know, lead to conservation or meaningful results, you know, we decided to put this platform there, and they're nesting it, and they're nesting successfully. You know, if you decide to plant common milkweed and you see monarchs on it, you as an individual just help them. You know, there's not too many things in nature. Osprey's success story, it's great, but, you know, lots of things are struggling. So individual actions do make a difference, especially with things that migrate. They need platforms, habitat loss and all these things. They don't have that many places to nest. It will be interesting in the future to see what happens with the ospreys when they level off, or if they keep rising. And I guess we're seeing some of that because you see them nest on telephone poles. You see them nest in all kinds of wacky places now because the numbers are getting so high. It's kind of a really neat thing to see. I have a little trepidation over it. They seem to be running out of nesting spots. And I don't think the best idea is to erect 10,000 more platforms. It requires a huge volunteer crew to keep these things going. So it's a great story, but you can just, by little small individual actions, make a big difference. And you can, if you have marsh near you, install an Osprey platform. Just get a hold of Conserve Wildlife or ENSP and they'll let you do it. You don't have to, you know, have a special permit to put up a platform. We have designs. You can make one. I can help you make one, and you can stick one up if you're in the right area. So looking at the runt there, as you see, as Lily was talking about, causes all that stress. I took a shot of them recently, like 1 or 2 days ago. That's the same birds. Now they're giant. They're just, I mean, those things were growing like, I don't know, like corn in the night when they were getting food. It was quite remarkable. You know, the camera in and of itself, if you pay attention to it, we can learn things that we never had access to before, watching these behaviors. we got to see these same chicks start moving sticks around in the nest. You know, just a behavior that they learn by watching their parents. It was so cool to see all of that. We have an incident I'm going to share with you, a little special video. There was an issue with the camera at one point. Again, remember, this was experimental. So Lily and I went to the nest, just picked a day to go over there. And believe it or not, when we had this going, if the camera was out for an hour, people were calling, what's going on with your camera? You got your camera going? What the heck's going on? I'm like, geez, people are really watching this thing. So we went up to fix it. I stuck my ladder up and I said, Lily, put your ladder up. And she said, look down there. And I looked down and there was one of the chicks in the marsh, all jammed up, and had climbing bone set vines all around its leg. It must have, you know, come in on a landing and missed the platform or something. I don't know. But once it gets down deep in the marsh there and all tangled up, it was stuck. It could have been stuck for a week and died. You know, it was a terrible situation. So we decided that we're going to save it, and you can watch what happened here. You can still see the stick. I couldn't get that stick out for the life of me. We were really hoping it wasn't going to fly right into the water or something. Which it almost did. There it goes. There it goes. Oh, good. He was stuck down in the marsh. So that was pretty cool. And just the random event that we happened to go there that day when it really needed us. Yeah, well, you know, our Osprey gets special attention. So here, if you go on our website, nature.org/KMA, you can see an Osprey Cam link around that red circle there. You click on that, it'll take you right to it. If you just go to YouTube and type in TNC or the Nature Conservancy and Osprey Cam, it comes right up. And check out our just YouTube channel, because as we've gone through this season with Osprey, with the camera, you can take still shots, you can capture video, you can do other things like that. And there's some really neat videos of all of our chicks doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Tug of wars with fish. It's just cool. There's a bunch of stuff that we've uploaded that you can check out. I think it's really opened up our program, having this camera, and we're thinking of, you know, expanding it to maybe other areas on the preserve. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And if there's any questions, we can get into some of those.
Okay, we do have a couple of questions. And everybody just keep typing your questions right into the chat. Damon, you mentioned that the Osprey pairs mate for life and they return to the same nesting grounds. Do they actually return to the same nest each year?
Yes, the same exact nest, assuming the tree hasn't fallen over, of course. But they'll come back to the same nest. And interestingly enough, there's no regular pattern to what they do in the nest as far as how many sticks and stuff like that. It's not like, well, all Osprey nests are a foot deep and that's the end of that. What we have found that some Osprey nests will have, no lie, 50 sticks on it. It's just bare. And they raise young, everything's fine. Another Osprey, it's like 3 feet high. It's just like people, I guess. You know, some people like a neat tidy thing, other people gather stuff. There's a lot of correlations with people. But yes, they come back to the same spot every year, which is kind of neat that they come back. Over time, you get to know some of them.
Okay, thanks. What impact do early hurricanes have on the nests?
Terrible impacts. I used to try banding them in the winter or the late fall after they leave. And what I've found out is over the winter and early spring, a lot of stuff happens. A lot of weather events happen. And then if I'm not there early March to look at them again, because remember, each time you go out, you got to take a boat out. It takes you a day at each site. There's 7 sites. It's not a one-day shot to look at 30 some platforms. So if they get blown off over the winter, It's a problem. So now we do it in the spring. But yeah, it really doesn't, it doesn't normally affect the platforms that are in decent shape and have the lower amount of sticks. It seems that probably 50% of the platforms that have the giant like eagle nest looking on the top of them, the whole top blows off the platform. It's happened more and more and more. As you know, we don't get regular storms anymore. Every rain that comes by is 50 miles an hour now. So it's just wreaking havoc on these platforms, and many of them are 20 years old out in the marsh. So we're having to do more and more repairs on these things. But, you know, I tell the Osprey every year, not so many sticks this year.
You said you'd like to be able to track the migration of an individual osprey. What would it take to do that?
It would take patience, and it would take money, and it would take the real, you know, probably the biggest thing you would have to be able to put in your head and accept is that this is a wild animal. You could end up with the most amazing story. You could end up with the bird tracking 2 miles away and dying. You don't know. You just have to keep in your head that this is a wild scenario. It's an experiment. You know, they've done snowy owls in the past that they've disappeared and they found them, but they've done loads of birds that have made it, and it creates a great story. If you're okay with that, you know, there's no guaranteed results. It could be just astounding. We have contacts with people that have transmitters, and the technology has advanced leaps and bounds. And I mean leaps and bounds. The days of a bird with a giant box on its back are over. They put these things on green darner dragonflies now and track dragonflies. That's the technology I'm talking about. They're a little bigger for Osprey, obviously, because they got to last a while. But I could supply all the information needed as far as cost, what it entails, if there's permits and this kind of thing. And I'm not talking, oh, you got to spend $100,000. Not even near that. But you need the funding up ahead, and it would take a while to do. But we're going to have the birds, our own birds, and we can have our own story, your story, be involved with it. I think it would be just amazing.
Damon, do the chicks come back to the same area to start their nests?
Yes, they come. You know, I can't prove it, but I've done these bandings so much. You'll see the adults, most likely the same ones, back to the same platform again, and then you'll see some juveniles that will come around the platform, and the parents get all annoyed. And I swear what's happening is the kids are coming home again, and the parents are like, no, you got to get your own place, kind of thing. Now, when they go down to South America and these other places, they don't come right back. The juveniles stay down there for 2 years. And then when they come back, they play house. So what they'll do is they'll find a suitable nesting place, sometimes not suitable, and they'll build a nest. And normally you can pick these out because the sticks are all messed up and they're half wrong. They're not nesting in there. They're just trying to make it. And it makes a lot of sense. You don't want your first shot at raising young do or die. You know, you want to at least have practice on it. So when they come back after the second year, they practice. Sometimes try to get back in the mom's nest. She kicks them out. And then, yeah, it's really neat to see.
You mentioned that people could build their own Osprey platform, and for information, they could contact Conserve Wildlife, or ENSP. Can you tell us what ENSP is? And also, what else can we do as individuals to help the Osprey?
ENSP is the Endangered Non-Game Species Program in New Jersey. I would start with Conserve Wildlife. If you look them up, they're like big time Osprey that they've been coordinating. I send my information to them, which they send it to the state. They have drawings. I have the drawings as well. They're not difficult to make. You know, basic carpentry, you can make one of these things. That the most difficult part is installing it. You know, it's a 16-foot 6x6. You're unlikely to just to pick that up by yourself with a top already on it and installing it. By a couple guys, you can do it. Normally you don't want to put it right next to the woods. You don't see osprey in the middle of the woods for a good reason. One, they normally need to like to be by water, but they like to kind of see around, you know, 360 degrees. And the closer they get to a wood line, the higher the chances are that something like a great horned owl is going to come. And great horned owls will just take an osprey out, even adults, just take them out. A 10-second story, I used to take kids out to do osprey banding from the inner city, and we came upon a platform, and I saw an owl take off, a great horned owl. I was like, whoa, what is that? We went up to the platform. Two of the young already were dead, and the owl was on the back of the third, and the adults were flying around. And the owl was so gigantic that the osprey couldn't do anything about it. So the farther you move them away from a wood line, the better, as far as that goes. The other part of the question, what else can you do? Well, I know this is one of these things that seems like climate change. It's a giant, big, hairy monster you can't do anything about, but every year we see more and more and more and more trash inside the osprey platforms. We saw some in ours, and ours is in the meadows. It's everywhere. This stuff is plastic is just everywhere. I just read they're finding it in human beings now, these little pieces of plastic. But so if you're, just, I don't even know how to say just clean up trash, but it is getting ubiquitous and it's not good. Our osprey had the paper bag on its claw one day. I eventually took it off the nest. It was annoying us so much. I don't know what the solution to that is, because it seems so insurmountable, but it does make a difference. I would suggest you, if you're around areas where they are and you see trash, pick it up, because it may seem silly that I'm saying this, but the nests are loaded with it. Go on YouTube and look at all the live cameras, and half of them are trash. And I hate seeing it. It's terrible to see. It's not helping the birds at all, especially when they get wrapped up in it. That's a pretty simple thing you can do, and I swear it would have an impact. I don't know where they're getting all the trash, but they're near water bodies and marsh, and that stuff's floating around there. We try to keep all of it out of the meadows. Lily's like uber fastidious with trash. He picks it up everywhere. There isn't any at our preserve, and yet the nest still had some in it. You can imagine when they erect these things near streets and roads, and they're just chock full of it.
Yeah, not only picking up trash near areas, but also just in general, just reducing single-use plastics, because that's I would say almost 100% of the trash that we're finding in the nest is things like, plastic spoon or mostly plastic bags. They seem to really like them for some reason, but definitely not good for them. The chicks can get tangled up and can actually cause them to die. So just something to think about in like everyday choices where you might not make the connection, but you are in fact actually helping wildlife or ospreys in general.
Yeah, and if you want to know more about it or see it in person, or maybe you know somebody that would like to be involved, keep in mind we go out every year. You can get a personal tour right up to one of the, it's amazing when you go up and see these birds. Conserve Wildlife, you can go on their site. They always need volunteers as well. That's kind of the hardest part, getting this work done. And you can help in lots of different ways. Ben, the guy that runs Conserve Wildlife, he had to do a GoFundMe to get a new boat, if that gives you an idea of the funding involved. But it worked. That's the world we live in. It worked, and he got a new boat. It was pretty cool. So there's issues up and down the line. He would be a good one to contact if you're interested, and come out with us. Or if you, like I said, somebody would really, it would blow their mind or something, bring them along.
Okay, just getting back to the Osprey platforms. Amy Green let us know that you actually need a permit from the New Jersey DEP in order to install an Osprey platform.
Well, thank you, Amy.
So yes, thanks, Amy. Good to know.
I'll go get that permit immediately. Sorry. No, I'm just kidding. I usually, the platforms we have were already up. The one at the Meadows was installed out by the dune near the ocean for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. And we didn't have a single bird in it ever. So we moved it to its current location inland a little bit. And the first year it got birds on it. It's had birds on it ever since then. But yeah, Conserve Wildlife is the best place to immediately go. Sorry about the permit snafu, but he'll guide you in a direction immediately. And it's unlikely they're going to say, well, no, that's not helpful to build another platform. They're getting to the point where they're trying to get osprey to nest in natural places, but it's getting hard. You go out to the shore and it's just everything's, and the old trees that are still there, in a few years they're going to be falling apart. But I don't know. It's it's one of these things that it's a decent problem to have. I think it can be solved. The important part is there's so many birds that this is an issue. I think it's not a bad thing.
Okay, well, that is it for our questions.
Okay.
Great. Well, thanks.
Thank you, Damon and Lily, and thank you all for joining us. And you can see Osprey are not only good indicators of food web health. It was the last time, biology in high school when I used food web. But as a migratory species, they require conservation action in multiple places and at multiple scales. TNC worldwide has been protecting critical osprey habitat, and right here in New Jersey as well. We've built and maintain their nesting platforms. We're contributing to the science, and most recently with our Osprey Cam by providing that unique glimpse inside their nest to watch their behaviors. We hope we're inspiring people to protect more nature. That's the hopeful result that we get from that. So thank you for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. We're deeply grateful for your continued support of our conservation work. It's always nice to see friends and supporters joining these. And we hope that you'll join us for our next event in this Conservation Connection series, as you see on the slide up there. Our next program is next Tuesday, August 25th from 1 to 2. It's investing in salt marsh restoration for people and nature. So with that, please feel free to turn on the gallery view again in the top right-hand corner of the screen and say hello to our staff before you sign off. So with that, thank you very much, and I hope to see you back here again soon.